Hi boys and girls, I'm Miss Sullivan, and I'm here to teach you about how Paul found Jesus. First thing I'm going to do is tell you that if you look in your little bags that you received from church, you should have had a little sheet like this. It's blue, and you'll have your mom, or you can do it, cut them into strips. So you'll have Paul, cut, the rest of cut, so you'll have a whole bunch of strips. And then as I tell you how to do it, you're going to link them together and you're going to make a chain of everything that happened to Paul, okay, in order. So the first thing I'm going to do is ask you a question, do you know what sin is? Anybody know what sin is? Sin is anything that you think, say, or do that makes God unhappy, that makes him sad, that displeases him. And if you remember from yesterday, we learned that everybody sinned. Everybody. All of us. All have sinned and fall short of the glory of God. And that none of us can earn it. We cannot earn his salvation. We cannot earn anything. It's only God's love that saves us. God chooses to love us because he is love. That's who he is. And his love is forever. Now, how do we know? How do we know God loves us forever? This is our verse today. But God proves his own love for us in that while we were yet sinners, Christ died for us. We didn't have to get all good before he died for us. He died for us while we were still sinners. He loves us so, so much. And we'll learn more about how Jesus made the choice in the garden tomorrow. We'll learn how he chose to lay down his life for us. But for right now, we're going to learn two things. I'll hold up one finger. Okay. Jesus loves you no matter what you've ever done. No matter what sin it is you ever committed, you'll ever commit, he still loves you with his whole heart forever. It's really important. That's the first thing we're going to learn. And the second thing we're going to learn is when God starts a work, he never ever stops till he's done. Okay? When he begins the work in us, he's going to complete it until the day of Christ. Whatever he started in us, he will help us. We hang on to him and he helps us and he completes it until Jesus comes back. Okay? So one of our verses today, this is our verse today that I already read you, but our other verse is, I am sure of this, that he who started a good work in you will carry it on to completion until the day of Christ. Okay, now I'm going to explain a couple things before we get into our story, because I want you to understand what happened. Before Paul, we're going to talk about a man named Paul today. Before he knew Jesus, his name was Saul. And he was Jewish. Now, Jesus was Jewish, the disciples were Jewish, all of the first Christians were Jewish. And they loved Jesus, not all of them, but some of them loved Jesus. But Saul was Jewish, but he didn't understand who Jesus was. And so he did not like Christians. And he went around hurting Christians and arresting them because he thought that they were not with God. And he was wrong. Okay? And sometimes we make mistakes. We think we know something a lot, and we're wrong. But God, in his kindness, will correct us. He doesn't just say, you're wrong, get out of here. He loves us, and he says, no, let me correct you. Okay? So, when he found Jesus, okay, so he was running around hurting Christians and arresting them, and one day he bumped smack dab into Jesus. And when he did, it changed everything. Everything about him changed. He realized, oh my, Jesus is God. Oh my, what have I been doing? And he changed, and from that day his name changed from Saul to Paul. So now when we read about Paul, it's the same guy. Anyway, so we're going to talk about what happened. God said, I want you to go out and tell all the people that are not Jewish about me, because I love them too. Not only do I love my Jewish people, but I love my non-Jewish people. Somebody has to go tell them. And so I want you to do it, Paul. And so Paul did. He obeyed God. And when he did, he went out and he went miles over the place, started churches, but guess what? There were other people that didn't like Christians, and so they arrested him and put him in jail. And this is the story of how Paul came before King Agrippa and told him about Jesus. And I'm also going to show you what he said about the day he met Jesus, when he bumped into Jesus. Okay? Now, as I read this story, I want you to get these ready, because you're going to be connecting them when I tell you to connect them. And we're going to make a chain like this, okay? Little by little, we're going to have this big chain of the order in which everything happened. Now, this is the picture of Paul. He was walking along the road to Damascus one day, and we'll get on with it. Sorry, I'm screwing it on. Okay, Paul had been chosen by God to tell the good news about Jesus to the Gentiles, people who were not Jews. Paul traveled thousands of miles telling people about Jesus and starting churches. This made some people so angry that they had him arrested, just like he did before. However, instead of being angry or scared, Paul knew that God was in control, and he knew he could use this arrest to talk to the very important government people. Now I want you to take your Paul and arrested links and link them together. Okay? Okay. Now, while Paul was in prison, King Agrippa came to visit Festus. He was the local governor. Festus told the king about Paul, and the king asked to see Paul. He says, I want to hear his story. So Paul began telling his story, and he told the King Agrippa that he used to be a Jew who hated Jesus. In fact, he spoke out against Jesus. He placed many people who were followers of Jesus in jail, and he even supported the ruler's decisions to put Jesus' followers to death. Now you can add your king and story links, okay, of your little things, okay? Then Paul told about the day he bumped into Jesus. The very day that he bumped into Jesus and became a Christian, and he started following Jesus and serving God. So he told them about that day. He'd been traveling to Damascus. Here's the road to Damascus. And they're walking along, probably singing songs to Jesus and talking about him. And, where am I? About midday. So it's noon, okay? It's noon, it's hot, but all of a sudden, there's this huge bright light. So bright, it was brighter than the sun. It was so bright, he was blinded and fell down. He couldn't take another step because he couldn't see where he was walking. And a light brighter than the sun, he said, I fell to the ground, and so did all the people traveling with me. And I heard a voice speak to me. And the voice said, why are you persecuting me? And Paul explained he was confused because he couldn't see anyone because it's so bright. So he asked who was speaking. He said, who are you, Lord? And the voice replied and said, I am Jesus, whom you are persecuting. Jesus told Paul that he had been chosen to go and tell the Gentiles how they could have faith in Jesus and receive forgiveness of sins, just like the Jewish people. Now you want to take and add your traveling link to your chain, okay? Now, Paul explained to King Agrippa that he obeyed the voice, and he did what Jesus told him to do. And he told people everywhere that Jesus, the Messiah, suffered and died, but rose again from the dead, which proves his God. Paul explained how God had helped him. Paul told the king that everything he said was true. Now you can add the obeyed in Jesus links. Second to the last. Now, are you trying to convince me to become a Christian too? Said King Agrippa. Paul replied, I truly wish that not only you, but that everyone who listens to me would believe in Jesus. Okay? That's quite a story. It's a great story, and it's a true story. Okay, so now I'm going to ask you some questions. See if you can answer them. Okay? What event made it possible for Paul to speak to the king, King Agrippa? Does anybody remember? It was that he was arrested. Okay? He was arrested for preaching the gospel, which means good news about how Jesus died for our sins and rose again. They didn't like it, so that's how he ended up there. But that was his big opportunity to talk to King Agrippa. Describe things that Paul did before he met Jesus. You know what things? Do you remember what things he did? He hated Christians. He arrested Christians. Sometimes he even helped put them to death. And he thought he was doing the right thing, but he wasn't. Okay? Number 3, what stopped Paul on the way to Damascus? Do you remember? He saw a bright light, so bright he could not see anymore. It was so bright. And then he heard Jesus speak. And it doesn't say here in the story, but in another place in the Bible it tells you he was blind for 3 days. He could not see. Just so God would make sure that he knew he didn't just imagine all this. He could not see for 3 days. So the next one is, who spoke to Paul after the light stopped him? Anybody remember the name? Jesus. Jesus. And what special job did Jesus give Paul? He gave him the special job of telling people who were not Jewish that Jesus loved them too. Telling the Gentiles about Jesus. What did King Agrippa ask Paul? King Agrippa said, are you trying to make me a Christian too? You know, that probably means God was niggling at his heart and he was beginning to think, something in what this guy says. A seed was probably planted on that day. The Bible doesn't say anything about it, but he might have found Jesus. We might see him in heaven when we get there someday. Now there's some discussion questions here that make you think, okay? Why do you think Paul hated Christians? I mean, Christians are pretty nice people. Why do you think he hated them? Anybody know? He didn't understand who Jesus was. At that time when he was doing those evil things, he didn't understand who Jesus was. And sometimes people say mean about Christians, it's just they just don't understand about Jesus. They didn't understand that he is God. Okay? They thought that Christians were going against God, but they weren't, because Jesus was the Messiah. Do you think, let's see, why do you suppose God allowed Paul to be arrested? Does anybody know? Sometimes God allows bad things to happen to us, but he turns it around for the good. He wanted Paul to be in a place where he could talk to King Agrippa. King Agrippa was never around any Christians. But God loved King Agrippa so much, he used Paul to get there so he could plant a seed in his heart about who Jesus was. Describe the difference Jesus made in Paul's life. Anybody can do that? He's walking along, thinking he knows everything. Boom! He hits Jesus, bumps into Jesus, and then what happens? He turns around and changes his whole life and becomes a servant of God. Total 360 degree, 180 degree, total 180 degree change in his life. And do you think that Paul's story had any effect on King Agrippa? I think it did. And the reason I do is if it didn't, he wouldn't have said, are you trying to make me a Christian too? So his conscience was beginning to work on him. And God plants seeds. And when God plants seeds, you might never see the plant grow up. But it does, because God doesn't do anything in vain. How can stories that you have about Jesus affect other people? Other people see that you know Jesus. You know him. He's your friend. He protects you. And they see that and they say, wait a minute. Because people watch and people hear and God plants seeds. Sometimes just the sweetest little thing will bring fruit. Now, here's a hard one. Are all people in need of Jesus' forgiveness? Everybody? Even the pastor? Even your teachers? Even the president of the United States? Yes, all people. Every single one of us need Jesus. We need him to forgive us. And the thing that's so cool, it's so wonderful, is that Jesus will forgive us. All we have to do is go to him and ask him and say, please forgive me, because I have sinned. I have said or thought or done things that made you unhappy. And I'm so sorry. And Jesus will always forgive you.